A major topic of discussion lately has been how game publishers treat their employees, with major companies like Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard having been exposed for their mistreatment of employees. And now Nintendo finds itself in the middle of a labor complaint as workers protest the way contractors are treated, as reported here by Axios' Stephen Totillo via this article whose headline reads, Nintendo hit with labor complaint, published on April 19th, 2022. This article provides the basic rundown, and then after that I'll show you a Kotaku article that kind of goes into more detail based on information they've received from sources they've contacted. But according to Axios' article, an unnamed worker is alleging that Nintendo and a firm it uses for hiring contractors violated their legally protected right to unionize, according to a new filing with the National Labor Relations Board. Allegations state that Nintendo of America and global hiring firm Aston Carter engaged in concerted activities and made coercive actions against a worker, interfering with their legally protected right to organize. Exactly what was reported from Activision Blizzard side of things, where it was stated that leadership and executives and management were pretty coercive about employees speaking out and their attempts to unionize. The allegations against Nintendo include surveillance threats, retaliation, and either a layoff or refusal to hire for anyone who dares to speak out about working conditions or to suggest unionization. And the complaint was filed to none other than the NLRB, which is the same organization that Activision Blizzard employees and Raven Software employees have been working with to file complaints against Activision Blizzard and get unionization going. Recall that it was only a couple months ago, back in December of 2021, that Call of Duty Warzone QA workers walked out in protest of layoffs, and this is a strike that continued for a week. Here's a report from January 17th, 2022, whose headline reads, Activision Blizzard employees continue to strike. And while they called for unionization, Activision Blizzard wouldn't yield. On January 25th, 2022, was reported by Polygon here, Activision Blizzard won't recognize Raven Software QA workers union. The union will now file with the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, for a vote. And fortunately, so far that has been going in their favor. It was reported quite recently on April 22nd, 2022. We're so proud to announce that the NLRB ruled that our unit is eligible for election. Thank you everyone for supporting our campaign since our initial strike up until this very moment. Time for democracy. And indeed, this has now been reported by a number of outlets. Activision Blizzard union at Raven Software eligible for election, says NLRB, and Activision QA workers win NLRB ruling, vote on union in April. So complaint filed to the NLRB can definitely lead to somewhere. It's going to be an uphill battle, but it's definitely a step in the right direction for mistreated workers who are seeking positive change. But yeah, these complaints seem to be coming specifically from Nintendo of America, but it's also worth noting that the company does hire this company, Aston Carter, a less visible player in the gaming industry, who has recruited customer service and administrative contractors for Nintendo. But it doesn't change the fact that Nintendo's been more than happy to let the way Aston Carter handles things fly and the mistreatment of contractors to continue. Which brings us to the Kotaku investigative report, whose headline reads, The Nintendo of America contractors who feel like second-class workers. Associates at the famed Japanese publisher complain about bad pay and an inability to voice dissent. This Kotaku investigation was a result of speaking to 4 sources familiar with the incident, and the complaint comes after a part-time employee spoke about unions in a business meeting and was later fired mid-contract. In an unprecedented move, others are now speaking up about feeling disrespected and exploited at the notoriously secretive Mario Maker. So in response to this one employee getting the stick for kind of vaguely mentioning unionization and potentially bettering the work environment of employees, he was let go, and that caused other employees to be like, all right, we've had enough. We got to speak out about this. We got to speak to news outlets and start spreading the word. And this is a movement that companies like Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard definitely fostered after their mistreatment of workers was exposed. Workers are less afraid than ever to speak out because they know that change needs to happen and change can happen based on what we've been seeing with Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard and how workers' protests has influenced companies' prioritization of employment practices and work culture, as companies are now beginning to realize, oh crap, we can actually get in serious trouble for this, and workers are not just taking it anymore. But yeah, apparently this department meeting where the now laid off worker mentioned unionization took place in February. A remark asking for general comment about unionization in the games industry came during an open question and answer period at the end. So much for openness in answering questions if there are consequences for asking. And it was shortly after this happened that the employee was fired, though Nintendo claims that it has nothing to do with questions about unionization being brought up. It has more to do with NDAs being violated. This is Nintendo's statement that they gave to Kotaku. We're aware of the claim, which was filed with the National Labor Relations Board by Contractor, who was previously terminated for the disclosure of confidential information and for no other reason, claims the corporation. Nintendo is not aware of any attempts to unionize or related activity and intends to cooperate with the investigation conducted by the NLRB. Nintendo's fully committed to providing a welcoming and supportive work environment for all employees and contractors. This is straight up the exact same blanket statement that Activision Blizzard continued to use after all of the allegations against the company and its negligence on its awful work environment got exposed. We take matters of employment very seriously. But here's the thing, based on what Kotaku sources have relayed, the social media post in question that apparently violated NDA and that allegedly got that employee fired was extremely vague. Nintendo's saying it wasn't the February meeting where the unionization topic was brought up, it was that social media post that violated NDA, except according to sources, based on disciplinary actions they had witnessed in the past, the social media post, which was vague, would normally have warranted a warning at best. Instead, they contend the contract worker was being retaliated against for their comments in the February meeting. And yeah, if you ask me, that is undoubtedly the more likely scenario given how major corporations have a track record of taking extreme measures to stave off any potential unionization among employees, giving employees any sort of power or seat at the table. According to 10 current and former employees at Nintendo of America, issues go deeper than just one instance of alleged retaliation. For the hundreds of contract employees at Nintendo of America, the dream can forever feel just out of reach and tarnished by the company's insistence on treating them like second-class workers. When asked for further comment, Nintendo declined. Then the article continues, employees Kotaku spoke with describe a two-tiered system where temporary workers are cycled through outside agencies on 11-month contracts with mandatory 2-month breaks in between. They say they can apply for unemployment during that time but remain without access to health benefits, and breaks between contracts sometimes last much longer. It doesn't help matters that pay is quite low, especially given that a lot of these contractors do the same kind of work that full-time employees do. They're compensated and treated like they contribute less than the average worker, which is just not true. Many testers say they make as little as $16 an hour, which is less than the minimum wage of next door Seattle in one of the priciest housing markets in the country. That's another thing to consider when you look at how much somebody's being paid per hour or what their salary is where they're living and how expensive it is to live there. A handful of people make over $20 an hour, but that's rare. The article then brings up Activision Blizzard, where employees through the NLRB managed to force Activision Blizzard's hand and had them announce that they were making testers full-time staff with full benefits and a starting rate of $20 following a recent push by QA staff at Call of Duty Warzone studio Raven Software to unionize. This is a result of their strike and their insistence on being treated more fairly. And the hope is that with Nintendo workers, as a complaint is filed to the NLRB, they too will be able to force Nintendo's hand to treat contractors fairly, especially with this report presenting pretty negative optics. In the eyes of these contractors, Nintendo of America relies on an army of contract workers in product testing, customer service, and other departments without providing any health insurance, few opportunities to be promoted to full-time, dangling that carrot but never actually allowing them to get it and keeping them around that way with the promise of a dream, if you will, that may never come to pass, and little recognition, both publicly and internally. I believe one of the nefarious aspects of Nintendo is that they don't credit contractors in their games, even if those contractors worked on that game. We're then taken to an account from one of Kotaku's sources, Jelena Jamonia, who worked as a contractor for Nintendo for quite a while, now a more than 5-year veteran of the temporary worker cycle. Jamonia began as a tester, quickly took on management responsibility. She was still only considered a part-time and thus kept at arm's length by the company despite working shoulder to shoulder with Red Badges, a nickname for those who are full-time employees. But she was doing the same work and her contributions were just as meaningful. That's the thing, it's not as if contractors are doing lesser work. Some of them are doing key work at the same level as the full-time employees, but get treated like crap. She said there are a lot of talented people who find the biggest, shittiest bugs that would make players freak out. They find them, report them, and then don't get credited. Again, a really scummy policy on the part of Nintendo, especially when contractors have played key roles in game shipping in a polished state. Jamonia continues, it hurts your pride because you do contribute to these games and the quality and reasons why players keep coming back. Jamonia then recalls one particular incident that really highlights the inequality between how full-time employees are treated and how contractors who again do similar level work are treated. She recalls one time in early 2020 when she slipped and hit her head while walking to work. When she went to visit for a checkup, she says that they turned her away because she wasn't a full-time employee and wasn't part of the Nintendo health insurance plan, so they just let her have this injury. She decided to ask a coworker to drive her to a nearby urgent care facility instead, since Nintendo's health care system wasn't an option, but that didn't work either because, according to company policy, her colleague could not drive her off-site. Despite her many contributions to Nintendo's projects, Nintendo rejected any sort of health checkup that was a part of Nintendo's health plan, but beyond that, they couldn't even allow her the courtesy to have somebody drive her to an outside care facility to get this injury checked up, because that's just how petty these corporations are. They prefer to prioritize their scummy policies over the health of a human being. Jamonia continues, they want to control you like you're full-time but not treat you like a full-time worker. Contract workers are expected to perform at the same levels as their full-time counterparts. Their access to Nintendo of America facilities is limited, though. Many said that they can eat lunch at the Mario Cafe but are expected not to linger in the main building. The company's hypervigilance around leaks means they must also be accompanied by red badges in many parts of the campus and can't even bring their parents on a tour of the Nintendo Museum there. I get being vigilant for leaks and all that, but there has got to be a better system than treating contractors and human beings like crap. Jamonia said you can work next to someone side by side for 20 years and not get invited to the company cookout. It's BS. The idea of being hired full-time is like a carrot on a stick to keep you dealing with the mistreatment. It's a form of abuse. They dangle this hope of full-time employment so that they can continue to mistreat employees without them kind of stepping out of bounds or speaking out too much. And to highlight just how egregiously Nintendo dangles this carrot, according to Kotaku's report here, one former associate worked at Nintendo for an entire decade with only 1 year off, but she was never promoted to full-time status. A decade's worth of contribution and still not enough to get your foot in the door. That's freaking ridiculous, especially if this associate has done good work. And for those who were lucky enough to actually get a full-time position, according to this report, it wasn't always a big jump in pay anyway. It's almost as though they want to compensate us with the privilege of working for Nintendo. So those who are made full-time employees through contract work are basically told, well, you should be grateful and therefore just take the abuse that we give you or take the lower pay that we give you, because it's a privilege for you to be working at this company, and that privilege alone should be some form of payment and recompense for the work that you do, which is complete and utter BS. Now, there are questions about who is in charge of these types of decisions, whether Nintendo of America can change this or whether it's up to Nintendo of Japan. They don't know if Nintendo of America has the authorization to make changes or if it's ultimately up to Nintendo of Japan and Nintendo of America's hands are tied. But regardless, it doesn't change the fact that how contractors are being treated is just not acceptable and something has to change. The article then proceeds to talk about how workers are afraid to speak out about working conditions in general. Current and former employees have also told Kotaku they felt that even discussing their working conditions could lead to repercussions. The general feeling is that you will be punished for being outspoken at every level. There's then mention of a culture shift that happened at Nintendo of America in 2015 where management put a greater emphasis on performance metrics, and this shift is speculated to have happened because of Wii U's poor performance. And this emphasis on performance metrics meant that essentially contractors were more encouraged to do overtime if they wanted to be assigned on more projects in the future. Otherwise, they would probably be seen as lazy or just not as good of a worker. Basically, this made it so that those who were willing to sacrifice their work-life balance were more likely to do more work. Those who were more willing to get exploited would get more work, whereas those who spoke out of turn would be taken aside and given warnings. Jamonia recalled a meeting in 2021 that took place during a wave of anti-Asian violence. Jamonia said that she shared that she was volunteering as part of a neighborhood watch group in Seattle to help people get home safely and to let her know if anyone else wanted to learn about it. Her manager had apparently been unhappy with her comment about wanting to make a contribution to society, and the representative reprimanded her on his behalf for going off topic to promote the volunteer group. Jamonia and others accused this dual system of micromanagement of breeding confusion and leading to games of telephone where agency reps misinterpret feedback from Nintendo of America staff and then lay it at the feet of contract workers. Some also feel incidents like this can hurt their slim chances of promotion or even get them laid off and never be invited back. She got a warning for bringing up a good cause that is completely unrelated to her work at Nintendo of America, just telling her cohorts, if you want to contribute to this, hey, let me know. And then beyond that, the way communication is handled between Nintendo of America and this contractor company means that sometimes communication isn't handled efficiently and they get the wrong kind of feedback that affects the employees negatively, miscommunication that the contract workers are left to deal with. Here's one more testimonial from Elizabeth Pring, who was on her second tour in testing at Nintendo of America recently when she says it was suddenly cut short. The director had said he would be remaining remote for health reasons, and Pring, who says she's immunocompromised, asked why contract workers weren't being afforded the same option. This was basically management going, I'm gonna keep my distance and keep myself safe, but you contract workers, you better come into the office and work in a more dangerous environment amidst this pandemic. Elizabeth aptly brought up, if you deem it to be dangerous enough that you gotta go remote, then why are we being told to come into the office, especially when someone like me is immunocompromised, which means that if they're affected by COVID, it'll hit them that much harder. Management didn't take kindly to this. Shortly after the meeting, she says she was chastised for not going through the proper channels. Pring said she was pulled aside for warnings like this 3 times in the past month. And it was only recently that she was let go from her position for this. On April 11th, she and 5 others dialed into a conference call. It turned out they were all being let go. Pring was stunned, she said, having received no indication from her supervisor that she would but cut mid-contract. Before the meeting ended, she shared her frustration that they weren't even given 24 hours notice that they would soon be out of work. I was effing pissed, she told Kotaku in a phone interview. It's no coincidence that this happened shortly after she raised the point of, hey, shouldn't us contract workers also be given a safe work environment, especially for people like me who are immunocompromised? The article finally concludes with quotes demanding for positive change and also just the general tension and the general fear of speaking out. You need to go after what you want in this industry because they will never just give it to you, said, I believe it is Elizabeth. I love games and someone needs to change this industry. And finally, Jamonia said, the air in the office is tense right now. They're afraid to talk about this. Of course, it's their livelihoods we're talking about, and these corporations know the power that they hold over these human beings who are depending on the corporation offering them employment to financially sustain themselves, and they take advantage of that. And it would seem as though Nintendo is no different, at least when it comes to contract work. And it is something that needs to be brought up, needs to be discussed amidst a landscape of abusive treatment against developers, employees, you name it. So hopefully this is news that will spread. Hopefully investigations will be conducted. Hopefully the NLRB will work with employees to foster positive change. At the very least, mistreated contract workers seem more enthusiastic than ever to speak out. In the comments section of this Kotaku article, you'll actually find someone who was allegedly a former contractor there with the phone lines 5 years back and experienced the Switch launch firsthand. If anyone from Kotaku wants to hear about my experiences, such as they were, I'd happily chat. Everything in the article about Parker is absolutely true and worse than written. I genuinely love the chance to open up about this old wound. And while I personally cannot confirm the legitimacy of this, somebody from Kotaku's already reached out asking for information, so we can probably expect more former contractors who felt mistreated to speak out and shine a brighter spotlight on all of this. And hopefully Nintendo will realize the error of their ways and change things sooner rather than later before stuff like this blows up further and further in their faces. But I suppose only time will tell how all of this will play out. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on these latest reports surrounding Nintendo's treatment of contract workers. And unfortunately, contract work in general is just rife with this kind of mistreatment. It doesn't make it okay, though. But let me know in the comments below what you think about all of this, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.